tonight.
There was a moment where I'm like, I might die today.
New details in the deadly shooting at a Georgia high school. What we know about the suspect and the victims who lost their lives. Plus,
we have to be strong. We have to project our strengths.
As world leaders push for a ceasefire and hostage deal, Israel hunts down Hamas in Gaza. And Kamala Harris and Donald Trump hit the campaign trail ahead of next week's debate. The latest in the race for the White House. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Negotiators are trying to break a stalemate in Gaza ceasefire talks. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Faith Nation from CBN's headquarters in Virginia Beach. I'm Wendy Griffith. The White House says conversations with Israeli counterparts are not letting up in hopes of securing a ceasefire deal. It's also engaging with Egyptian and Qatari intermediaries for Hamas. This amid reports that American families are pushing President Biden to make a separate deal with Hamas. CBN's Tara Mergener is here with the latest. Tara, what are you hearing?
Wendy, there are 7 hostages with dual U.S.-Israeli citizenship. And today, a father said there is no truth to reports that American families are petitioning the White House to cut a unilateral deal with Hamas, though frustrations are mounting.
Jonathan Degelchan, whose son was kidnapped by Hamas terrorists during the October 7th rampage, told an Israeli broadcaster that the NBC News story is false. I am in continuous contact with the other American families and all levels of the U.S. government. That report the American families are demanding a separate U.S. Hamas is not correct. Claims that a deal is being floated come as concerns Netanyahu will not strike a deal grow louder after the murder of 6 hostages. A video released by the IDF shows the entrance to the tunnel where the bodies were discovered, accessible through a children's play area with stuffed animals and cartoon characters on the walls. Some critics are accusing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of not getting a ceasefire deal done to appease far-right members of his coalition who want the war to go on until Hamas is destroyed. Netanyahu argues that this is a tactic by Hamas to cause discord, citing a document discovered in an underground command post that details the terror group's strategy.
I'm willing to make a deal. I made one already, one that brought back 150 hostages, 117 alive, and I'm committed to return the remaining 101.
A key stumbling block in negotiations is Netanyahu's refusal to fully withdraw troops from Gaza's border with Egypt. The proposed deal includes a 6-week truce that would require Israel to pull out of the Philadelphia corridor.
Leaving Philadelphia does not advance the release of the hostages.
Meanwhile, a Chinese envoy is now urging prompt diplomatic efforts to end the war and address the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, including the immediate release of all detainees.
停火谈判已经拖得太久了，普通民众的苦难已经持续得太久了。
And Israeli Defense Forces have moved hundreds of troops into several Samarian cities, marking the largest operation in the West Bank, Wendy, in 22 years.
Tara, thank you so much for that report. Now to that deadly shooting at a high school in Georgia. The alleged shooter, 14-year-old Colt Gray, is behind bars tonight after police say he killed 4 people and injured 9 others. The Washington Post reporting Gray was begging for months for mental health help, and he had a difficult home life. His aunt says she tried to help from afar. Authorities confirm previous contacts with Gray's family and the local child services department. The victims are identified as 14-year-old students Christian Angulo, Mason Schermerhorn, and math teachers Richard Aspinwall and Christina Arimi.
I saw like my math teacher, and he was all covered. I saw blood everywhere.
Officials say the 9 wounded victims are expected to make full recoveries. Investigators have been searching the suspect's home and interviewing his parents in search of a motive. Another big question tonight, how he got his hands on a gun in the first place. Authorities say the suspect will be charged with murder and tried as an adult. Well, a global fight over freedom of speech is underway. More countries are passing laws to regulate so-called hate speech and disinformation online. In America, free speech advocates argue that's part of what the First Amendment was designed to protect. Dale Hurd has our story.
A censorship movement is rising in the world's democracies, whether it's British citizens charged over their social media posts, France's arrest of the owner of the social media platform Telegram, Brazil's shutting down X after Elon Musk refused to comply with censorship restrictions, or Mark Zuckerberg's admission that the Biden White House pressured Facebook and Instagram to censor stories it didn't like.
This anti-free speech movement is the most sophisticated, largest, and global movement we have ever faced.
Legal scholar Jonathan Turley is the author of The Indispensable Right, Free Speech in an Age of Rage.
I think that the problem with free speech is that every generation has to defend it. And this generation has never been more divided because they have been told that free speech is going to hurt them.
A poll this year found nearly 1 in 3 Americans now believe the First Amendment goes too far.
I think we need to push back on this. There's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation or hate speech, and especially around our democracy.
The freedom to say what the majority doesn't like is the very foundation of a free society. And yet that bedrock freedom is increasingly being tossed aside. An investigation by the Foundation for Freedom Online found documents from Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, that seemed to indicate as recently as last year that the agency worked with platforms to censor speech by labeling people posting so-called misinformation as domestic threat actors. The website was then scrubbed from the internet but was found using the Wayback Machine. A CISA spokesman said the agency has never censored anyone and that the material was probably removed because it created a misunderstanding. But CISA is a part of Homeland Security, which tried to create a disinformation czar. Documents obtained under the Freedom of Information Act from USAID, a State Department program intended to strengthen democracies overseas, show that the agency encourages other nations to censor social media. In other Western democracies, the censorship situation is even worse. In Great Britain, a nation most Americans used to consider a bastion of democracy, police charge thousands of citizens each year over their social media posts.
Arresting you on suspicion of improper use of the electronic communications network.
What? A British official also threatened to extradite Americans who stir up trouble in the UK through online posts. The European Union no longer has free speech online, according to technology expert Dr. Norman Lewis with the think tank MCC Brussels. Lewis says only speech approved by the EU government is allowed.
What we have operating in Europe is what I call it's a censorship operating system.
Laws like the EU's Digital Services Act force technology companies to remove content Brussels doesn't like.
They want to control the public square. And so, formally speaking, there's free speech. But when you have such vague definitions as hate speech or any of these new, woke ideologies, is all about controlling speech. So you can formally uphold free speech, but in reality, it means that you curb stuff that you don't like.
One EU official threatened Elon Musk over his interview with Donald Trump.
There really is what I call an EU Ministry of Truth. George Orwell would recognize this within a millisecond.
America's First Amendment was written to prevent this kind of censorship. By defending speech the majority finds offensive, insulting, and even verbally abusive. The Supreme Court has said the First Amendment protects the freedom to express the thought that we hate.
Free speech is a natural right. That was how the framers viewed it when they wrote the First Amendment. They believed that free speech was a gift from God, that it belonged to you as a human being. It wasn't granted to you by the government. It's not tolerated by the government. The government has to protect it because it defines you as a human being.
Some say one reason for the recent riots in Britain is that citizens were not allowed to publicly express their frustrations about mass migration without being arrested. Ken Paulson, the former editor-in-chief of USA Today and director of the Free Speech Center at Middle Tennessee State University, says the First Amendment freedom of speech is vital to America's existence.
I believe that we need an environment in which all ideas can be shared, regardless of merit. And unless you are able to speak as you wish, then there is no way we remain rich and strong as a nation.
Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Thank you, Dale. Up next, the latest on the battle for the White House when Faith Nation returns. Welcome back. 5 days from now, former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris will face off on the debate stage. But in the meantime, both are hitting key swing states during a busy week of campaigning. CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Michelle London joins us now in Washington with the latest on the race for the White House. Michelle?
Well, Wendy, new rules are set for Tuesday's presidential debate. But tonight, Vice President Harris is in Battleground, Pennsylvania for debate prep as former President Trump wraps an event in New York City.
Inside Philadelphia's National Constitution Center next Tuesday, former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris will meet face-to-face on the debate stage. As the countdown begins, excitement is growing.
Oh, I think it's a perfect place to have the debate, particularly we're talking about the notion of freedom. I think that's what this election is about.
Along with a bit of uncertainty.
So I'm not sure that I'll hear anything new in the debate, but I think it'll be interested to see how the interaction takes place.
Speaking of interaction, new rules are now set, ensuring both presidential nominees can fairly answer each question. Harris and Trump's mics will be muted until it's their turn to speak. They won't be allowed to bring additional notes with them. Also not allowed, questioning each other during the debate. Before hunkering down in Pittsburgh Thursday night to prep for the debate, Harris outlined more of her policies the night before in New Hampshire.
Part of my plan is we will expand the tax deduction for startups to $50,000,
which would give entrepreneurs the funds to start small businesses. Harris is also pushing for a lower tax on capital gains, pitching a 28% rate compared to Biden calling for nearly 40%. During an exclusive Fox News town hall in Pennsylvania, Trump agreed to comply to the new debate rules. Then he laid out plans to implement protection trades that would reduce gross domestic product growth and raise prices, before blaming the Biden administration for the current state of the nation.
If you let the Trump tax cuts expire, you will suffer the biggest tax increase in history.
Overnight, a surprising endorsement from a high-profile Republican.
Because of the danger that Donald Trump poses, not only am I not voting for Donald Trump, but I will be voting for Kamala Harris.
And also today, President Trump's legal team was back in court for a hearing to determine how his election interference case should move forward after the Supreme Court's ruling on presidential immunity. Trump denies all wrongdoing. Wendy?
Michelle, thank you so much for that report. Well, one of the biggest issues for voters this November is, of course, the economy. Mark Hamrick is here with us now. He is the Washington bureau chief and senior economic analyst at Bankrate. Welcome back, Mark.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
Well, tomorrow is a big day for the economy. The Labor Department is expected to release new numbers on employment. The results could go a long way in determining the future of Federal Reserve policy. What are you expecting to see from tomorrow's jobs reports?
You remember that the July jobs report we got a month ago set off a wave of worry and some selling in the stock market. Because it came in weaker than expected, the nation's unemployment rate moved to 4.3%, and jobs creation in July substantially weaker than expected. Since then, we've had an array of data points that are pointing to further softening in the economy, and the job market is definitely cooling. In terms of this next report, we're expecting to see the unemployment rate actually move down 0.1%. That's the consensus among economists, and that we'll see a slight pickup in hiring, something on the order of 150 to 175,000 jobs added. The Federal Reserve, as you noted, is meeting in the middle part of this month, and it is expected now to begin reducing interest rates as it shifts its main focus away from inflation and towards supporting the job market.
Mark, with the price of houses so high, a recent Wall Street Journal poll found only 10% of Americans believe home ownership is easy or somewhat easy to achieve. How long until housing is affordable again for most people?
There's been a decades-long housing shortage in the United States, and so this is not an event that has really occurred recently, but it is the fact that we had a sharp run-up in mortgage rates for the very reason that the Federal Reserve was raising rates, because those things are connected. And we've had year-on-year increases in home prices. No one is predicting a quick resolution of this issue, and I'll be eager to see whether this is a subject that has fruitful conversation in the upcoming presidential debate. There is not a silver bullet to be fired at this, but we do expect mortgage rates to come down further in the coming 12 months. And with each move down in mortgage rates, that helps the housing affordability quotient. It's not a salvation, but it's a modest help.
Yeah, I think we'll all be watching the debate with you. Well, the stock market has had some wild swings lately. Is that just market behavior, or are there legitimate concerns about an economic slowdown?
Stocks move up and move down in the long term. The reality is the benchmark S&P 500 index is close to a record high, and we've seen repeated record highs achieved so far this year. The volatility of late, as we mentioned, has been connected to a growth scare, the concern that the economy is slowing more than expected. But this volatility is nothing out of the ordinary, and for long-term investors, that's everybody who's saving for retirement, they just need to keep the seatbelt buckled and realize they're saving for the long term, need to ride these things out.
All right, Mark Hamrick with Bankrate, thank you so much for your analysis. Thanks.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, coming up, how experts say you can protect yourself from deadly mosquitoes and summer viruses. Next. Welcome back. Many Americans have been enjoying these last days of summer outside. Health officials in several states, though, are warning people to protect themselves from mosquitoes. A wet summer has caused a spike in the disease-bearing insects, leading to a spread of 2 potentially deadly viruses. CBN medical reporter Lori Johnson has that story.
Health officials are targeting the mosquito population in parts of the Northeast, including Massachusetts, New York, and New Hampshire. Trucks driving up and down the street near Boston are spraying thick plumes of insecticide. Overhead, planes blanket rural areas to destroy the breeding grounds of the germ-bearing insects.
What aerial application does is gets to areas where you can't get to them by truck.
The concern is over increasing cases of West Nile virus and Eastern equine encephalitis, or triple E, 2 mosquito-borne diseases which can be serious, even deadly.
I think I'll pay more attention at how many mosquitoes are actually outside my house. I think everybody will do the same thing to see if it made a difference.
Some cities closed their parks from sundown to sunrise when mosquitoes are out in full force.
My mom sprayed me.
Yep. We were choking in the car. We had to roll the windows down because all of us were loaded with the spray.
There are no vaccines or medicines to treat the diseases. A 41-year-old Hampstead, New Hampshire man died from triple E. A growing number of people have died from West Nile, including a Lake County, Illinois person in their 80s. Health officials warn it's a reminder that older people and those with weakened immune systems are especially at risk. That includes the government's former top infectious disease expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci. The 83-year-old is now recovering at home after being hospitalized for West Nile after reportedly being bitten by a mosquito in the backyard of his Washington, D.C. home. The CDC reports cases of West Nile in 33 states right now. While people don't always experience symptoms, they can include fever, headache, body aches, vomiting, and fatigue.
The best thing is to avoid having still water around your property.
Since mosquitoes breed in standing water, it's important to empty outside items that collect water, like buckets or spare tires, and fill in holes in your yard. Protect yourself by covering up with a hat, long pants, and sleeves, and consider a good bug spray or more natural alternatives.
Lavender, certain types of light. And so there's many ways to prevent mosquito bites, and it is probably a good idea for most people to think more about that.
Experts say this year's warm, wet summer set the stage for a surge in the mosquito population. And while mosquito-borne illnesses do pose a threat right now, they're actually way down from the distant past.
There was a time when large swaths of the population of Boston and Washington, D.C., which were essentially built on swampland, would die from mosquito bites, from yellow fever and malaria. So we've made significant progress.
While deaths from mosquito-borne illnesses in the U.S. remain rare, that's not the case in other nations. In fact, worldwide, more than 600,000 people currently die each year from malaria alone, making it a leading cause of preventable death, and the mosquito the deadliest animal on the planet. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
That's scary. All right, nearly a week after a home collapsed during a landslide, whimpers are heard from the rubble, and rescuers made a surprising discovery. See the happy ending next. Finally tonight, 2 lucky dogs. After a home collapsed in a landslide in Alaska, the family thought for sure their 2 dogs were gone forever. Their home was pushed 47 feet downhill into a neighbor's house. After nearly a week, a geologist heard whimpering from the rubble. Firefighters came to find the sound, and sure enough, the 2 dogs, Alani and Cassie, were in there, alive, pinned on a couch. They were blinking, and whimpers got louder and louder and higher pitched as rescuers got closer to them. The dogs were reunited with their owners and are now doing well. Guys, that is not just good news. That is great news. And I don't know about you, but that story makes me happy. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow. Good night.